Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. In this tutorial I'll be sharing how to make this cage neckline design. So if this is something you're interested in learning, you want to keep on watching. So these are all the items I'll be using for this project. My pattern paper, I've got rolls of bias here. This is already made bias, but you could use your own bias, make your own bias from scratch. But this I got as rolls from the market, and I got 4 rolls for this. I also have my tape, my scissors, pen, and ruler, of course. So to begin, we'll be making the front plan, and you will need your full front plan for this. Okay, so this is all my body lines marked out here, my bust line, my waistline, my under bust line as well. Then on the center point of this paper, you can see I drew a line that extends from the top to the bottom along the center, from where all measurements will be taken on either side. This is to ensure that all the measurements are even on either side, considering the fact that I'll be taking the full measurement for the front plan. So what I just did was or what I'm doing rather, is to mark my shoulder measurement. So from that center front line that extends from the top to the bottom, I'm taking half of my shoulder width on either side of that center front line, and I am connecting it to the upper chest line with a straight rule like this. So this would be the shoulder or the armhole line that comes from the shoulder line to the upper chest line. So I did it on either side of the front plan. Next up, on either side of that center front line, I'm going to mark 3 inches along the shoulder to create my neck width. You can work with any neck wideness or neck width that you prefer, but I'm working with 3 inches on either side, and I'm going to mark the 3-inch point, and the neckline would be 3 inches deep. So along that center front line that goes from top to bottom, I'm going to mark 3 inches into the neckline and then connect all the points together with a curve. I really do hope that this is visible, because I just realized that it's not as clear as it should be because of the color of the pattern paper. Do bear with me. So after connecting that to the point to form the neckline, the next step is to extend that shoulder line by 4 inches. So I'm going to extend that shoulder line by 4 inches as though we were making a batwing outfit. So I'm extending the shoulder by 4 inches on either side. Then I'm going to drop it by 1.5 inch. So after extending by 4 inches, I'm going to come down by 1.5 inch like this, and then connect it back to that neckline point. Just see what I'm doing, and I'm sure you will get to understand as we progress. So this would be the new shoulder that I'll be working with, not the first one that was drawn. So I'm going to do this on either side of my paper. I'm going to measure 1.5 inch downwards and 4 inches outwards on either side of the pattern paper. Having done that, what I'll be doing next is to take the dart on either side of the front line, front pattern rather. So from that center front line on one side, I'm marking 4 inches, which is half of my bust span measurement, 4 inches on all my body point lines, using that center front line as a guide. Then I would connect all those points together with a straight line. Now I'm going to go below my bust line by 1 inch and above my bust line by 1 inch. This is to avoid pockiness or pointiness on that bust line. Then on my under bust line, I'm going inwards by 1.5 inch. I'm also going to go inwards on the waistline by 1.5 inch as well. So having marked the 1.5 inch on the waistline and on at the under bust line, I'm going to connect those points together. Then on my upper chest line, I'm going to go inwards by 1.5 inch as well. So what we are doing right now basically is creating the dart. Next, I'm going to connect all those points together with a curve to form the dots for this pattern. So after curving it out, I repeated the same process on the other side of the pattern paper because we need the full front plan for this, hence why I'm drawing it on either side of the paper. So this is just what my full front plan would be looking like. So next up, I'll be taking my body measurements. So I'm going to start with my bust point. My bust point divided by 4 is 9.5 inches. Then I'm going to add 1.5 inches for the dart that was taken and an extra 1.5 inch for seam allowance and ease as well. So when taking your body measurements for this, you divide your body circumference by 4 on either side of the paper. um you divide by 4 on either side of the paper and take your measurement from that center front line, ensuring to replace the measurements for the dart and ensuring to add seam allowance as well. So do note that since you're taking on either side, you'll be taking from the center front of the paper as opposed to taking your measurement from end to end. Next, that point of the shoulder that we drew earlier, I'm going to connect it with a straight line to the armhole like so. So I'm going to draw a line that goes from the edge of that new shoulder line that we created earlier to the point where that armhole line meets my upper chest line. Just take a look at what I'm doing and I'm sure you understand it better. So this is what the armhole looks like. The reason I extended this armhole or this shoulder this way is because it's going to be an off shoulder kind of neckline situation. So this works better as opposed to just cutting it like a normal armhole, right? Next, I'm going to cut out all the pattern pieces and label them accordingly. So this is the lower part and that is the upper part of the pattern. So next up, I'm going to separate the darts on the lower part on either side, ensuring to label all the pieces accordingly. So this is the side front, the right part, the center front, which I'm going to cut on fold, and the side front of the left part of the side front, and this is the upper part, which would be the yoke that we're about to make into this design. For the back plan, I basically repeated the same thing we did on the front plan, just that I added a zipper allowance to the back plan, and the dart is different because it's a straight dart for the back plan. If you don't understand how to make a simple a basic busty pattern, do check the tutorial on the channel. I have it linked in the description box. So I'm just going to separate all the dart pieces for the back, and this is the right side of the back. I have the center back, the right part, the center back, the left part, as well as the left and right parts of the side back as well. So I'm basically separating all the darts, and this is what the back plan all laid out look like. Now do note that the center back has a zipper allowance which we might not be needing for the upper part, which is the yoke, so we would be taking off the zipper allowance from the upper part of the back plan because of the nature of the neckline that we'll be creating. And to do this, for that, from that zipper allowance, which is this line here, I'm going to go in by 1.5 inch, and I'm going to mark the 1.5 inch mark, and below the neckline I'm going to come down by, you can do anything from 1 inch to half an inch depending on your preference, or you can just do it from end to end, but I'm working with half an inch, and from that half an inch point I'm going to connect it to that 1.5 inch with a curved cut or a curve basically, and I'm going to cut out that pattern. So what I'm going to do is to place both back upper back pieces together and cut them together just so I have it equal and even on both pieces. So I'm just going to cut that out for the back plan. So after cutting, this is what they look like placed side by side. So what I'll be doing next is to tape attach this to the front pattern along the shoulder with tape or gum. You can use sellotape, you can use gum, but I'm using tape for this. So I'm going to tape the shoulder of the back to the shoulder of the front like I have done. Then remember we drew a center front line earlier for the front pattern, which is this that I just drew again so it's more visible. Then along that shoulder point which was taped, I'm going to rule another line again. So basically what I'm doing is just highlighting the midpoint or the midpoint of all the patterns, just so it's easier to demarcate this into smaller sections later. So once I mark this shoulder, you can use a ruler for this. You can rule at intervals. So but what I'm doing is ruling all the midpoints, and I'm kind of gauging it with my eye to figure out where the midpoint between each line is, and this works for me. But if you can't do this, I suggest you measure from end to end. So I'm just gauging the midpoint between each line and drawing a line in between them to section the paper into smaller portions. And I'm going to do this on all parts of the paper from end to end, from front to back rather. So once that is done, after taking all the vertical lines around the paper, the next thing is to create this curved line, more like a web kind of effect. And to do this, from the neckline, I went below the neckline by 1 inch, making sure to cut across all the vertical lines that were drawn earlier. So you can see it's 1 inch below the neckline. So to get the next point, I'm going to go 1 inch below that first curve that was drawn, using the vertical lines as reference points again. So when taking the next curve, you use the previous curve to the last curve as a guide and measure 1 inch below that. So that is what you see me doing. I'm going 1 inch below the first curve that was drawn around the neckline, ensuring to cut across the all the vertical points from end to end. So I'm just going to do this round and round and round till I have fully uh gone round the entire paper. So you can see what I'm doing: 1 inch, 1 inch, 1 inch as well from the last line, 1 inch. So when I have fully drawn from end to end, I'm going to connect all those points together. You can use your ruler, but I worked with my free hand. I felt it's easier to control since it's more like a circle kind of line. So I'm working with my free hand and I'm going to connect all those dots together. And this is what I'm going to repeat round and round till I have it looking like this. So this is what it should look like when you're done. So this line here that I stroke, I won't be working with that because it was too close to the previous one. So I'm going to start by sewing on the bias on the vertical lines first. So I'll be working with the vertical lines first before working on the curved lines or the round or the curved lines basically. So I'm going to sew from the vertical lines first before moving over to the circular ones. So to do this, I'm going to open up my bias tape. So I'm going to open up the roll of bias, and you can see that on the bias, one side has the raw edges or the two folds, while the other side is straight. So the side that has the raw edges or the two folds on either side, I'm going to close those folds by folding them together like this. I'm going to make a bend and fold them like this into two. Then I'm going to place it on each straight line or on each vertical line and sew really close to the edge of the bias tape from top to bottom. So this would attach the bias to the paper as well as seal up the edges or the raw edges of the bias. So with this, I don't have to bother about stitching up the bias first before coming back to stitch it to the paper. So this just saves a lot of time. And when I was done doing that, this is how it came out looking. Like I said, I started off with the straight lines first. So I'm going to go ahead now and repeat the same thing on the curved lines. So basically for the straight lines I use almost one roll. I have just that little piece left, so I'm just going to open up another roll of bias. See the two raw edges, I'm going to place them. These are the raw edges that I talked about earlier on the bias. So it comes folded, so I'm going to fold it inwards again so those edges are locked in and not exposed. So what I'll do next is to basically the same way I attach the bias to the straight lines, I'm going to attach it to the curved lines, ensuring to place the bias right on the lines that I drew earlier and sewing on the edge of the bias tape, ensuring that I close the edge of the bias really well and nicely. So I'm going to go ahead, and this is what it looked like. This did take a lot of time, I must confess. It took a lot of time, so if you're doing this you need all the patience that you would need to complete this project. So before we continue, if you're still watching up to this point, please do not forget to like, share, subscribe, and join the family if you haven't joined the family. So this is what we have for the neckline. Next, I'll be attaching this design to the neck of the garment, and to do this I'll first have to attach the sleeves to the garment, since the design would go round the entire neckline from end to end and through the sleeves as well. So I went ahead to attach the sleeves, but the sides of the garment are pretty open, are open actually. So I'm just going to go ahead and attach it from end to end. So when doing this, you want to ensure that the midpoint, you take into consideration your midpoint. So you want to take a notch or notch the middle point of your garment and the middle point of your neck design as well. So I'm just going to align the midpoint of my neckline, so that is the midpoint of my neck design, and I'm going to place it on the midpoint of the garment which I'm already notched, and I'm just going to place it all the way around like this till I get to the end on this side, and I'm going to repeat the same thing towards the other side as well. Place the midpoint onto the middle point of your front garment, on of the front of your garment, and just sew from end to end. So you are going to sew from end to end. So do note that when sewing from end to end, you might actually pick some of the paper, but at the end of the whole sewing process you can easily like pick the paper out without having to worry about too much. Okay, so after sewing it on, this is what it looks like. It looks really really beautiful, I must say. So I've already started picking the paper, so I'm just going to gently, you don't want to apply force while doing this. You want to take your time so you don't rip the seams or anything like that, or tear, or just ruin the whole design. So I'm going to take my time and pull all the paper from the cage design that we just made. And for the neckline, to close up the edge of the neckline, I'm going to pipe from end to end. So I'll be piping from end to end of the bias to seal up those raw edges, as well as the back of the bias to seal up those rough edges. And that is pretty much it. It's really easy, really simple. Do give this video a thumbs up if you learned something. Like, share, subscribe, join the family, and let me know your thoughts about this in the comment section. And I will see you guys in another video. Bye.